Hello and welcome to episode 88 of To Be Read. TBR, the To Be Read podcast, where we talk about the books we love and the topics that interest us. I'm Patrick Stemp, and as always, I'm joined by Michael Ronn. How are you, Michael?
I am great, Patrick. How are you?
Good. And John L. Monk. How are you, John?
I'm doing great. Thanks for asking.
And this week we have a guest, Zach Bohannon. How are you doing tonight, Zach?
I'm good. Thanks for having me on, guys. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for coming. And Zach is one of the hosts of the Horror Writers podcast with Jay Thorne and the author of Empty Bodies. And he has come on the show tonight to help us talk about our topic, which is basically how dark is too dark when it comes to horror, or not necessarily horror, any book. As usual, we'll start with our weekly roundtable and talk about what we've been reading over the last week or so. And I guess I'll go left to right on my screen, which means I'll start with John.
You always start with me. All right. Okay, for those who have been following my blatherings, they know that I'm not much of a comic book person. I've never really got into them. And I've always wanted to because people love them so much. So, based on recommendations of the folks on the show, I went and got The Sandman. Cool. I'm a Neil Gaiman fan. You can't really screw up, I would think. Well, I read the entire first. It's like this thick, like half an inch or whatever of the first. I don't know how they do it. Like a bunch of them all together in one installment.
Like an arc.
Yeah, I don't know. Anyway, I read a bunch of them, and it was pretty thick, and I really liked it. It's interesting. You have to sort of exercise different muscles when you read a comic book. When you read a fiction sort of novel, you got a lot of words to process. You turn your brain off more. You're just saying, I accept what you are writing to me, because if you question everything, you're out of the book. So with a comic book, you're looking at the pictures, you're thinking about the little bit of words that you got. There was something about it that seemed almost like watching a play. So, I am showing up with my powers to stop you. No, you are not. And I don't know. I won't go on too much more, but I really liked it. It was weird. It was actually very, very soul-destroyingly violent and kind of emotionally destroying. It fits right in with the show, believe it or not. And that's my book.
Okay. Michael, how about you? What have you been reading over the last week?
Yeah, I've been reading. Actually, I just finished last night the book that we're going to read, or that we're going to talk about for our next book discussion, which is the Zodiac Legacy Convergence by Stan Lee, Andy Tong, and can't remember the third author. But yeah, I guess I can't say too much about it, but I did finish it, and I did find that it was a pretty quick and easy read. I don't know if any of you guys have started it yet.
I was worried because it looked like there was 500 pages on Amazon. And you know me, I don't read very quickly, so.
Yeah, it goes pretty quickly. It's a pretty fast read. So I won't say too much about that. But the second book I've been reading is I reread How to Write Fiction Sales Copy by Dean Wesley Smith, because I'm going back through a few of my books and refreshing my book descriptions because it's about time. So I found that immensely helpful. So I've talked about that one on the show before. And then the book that I started today was a book that I guess I knew about this author, but I heard about him on a podcast, and that is The Black Echo by Michael Connelly, which is the first book in the Harry Bosch series. So he was on the Kobo Writing Life podcast last month, and I just finally got around to listening to it. And great interview. I mean, just a super dynamic guy, and nice. So you read it then?
No, I read the first 3 or 4 pages and then I put it down.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, I've read the first 10, 15 pages, and I'm going to keep reading. So we'll be able to talk about that next week. But I like it a lot. I like Connelly a lot. I actually shared the podcast, and he retweeted my post, which is like, holy cow, like that's awesome. So I was like, okay, well, I have to go buy this book now. I was going to buy it anyway, but went and got it, and yeah, I like it so far. I can definitely see what the appeal is. His writing style in a way kind of reminds me a little bit, and maybe this is stretching a little bit, but kind of reminds me of Michael Crichton, just in terms of how he approaches the characters and gets inside their heads. So, yeah, I mean, it's your typical crime novel. I mean, I'll
I think
be
that's
able
what
to.
kind of that's why I put it down. I remember picking it up to read it, and It starts with an alcoholic PI going out into the dark rain to find some dude that he used to be in the army with, and I
Yeah,
kind
yeah,
of felt like, so I think I would have 2 points there. A, it's been done, but B, he certainly didn't start it, but I mean he's been doing it long enough that like that maybe when he started wasn't such a trope.
right.
Or maybe it was. I wasn't impressed enough to keep going. It's I've still got it on my shelf though. I might go back to it sometime.
Yeah, I mean, this is it's not my first crime book, but I think it's one of the first that has kind of interested me and kept me reading.
Hmm.
So I've read some crime before, but I like this one, so I'll be able to talk about it more next week.
Cool.
So that's my week.
How about you, Zach? What have you been reading lately?
So I've got quite a bit, I guess, but I'll be short with each because I usually will read and listen to a book at the same, like simultaneously. So a few days ago, I finished the audiobook of Fever Dream, which is George R. R. Martin's vampire novel, which was actually really good. It kind of takes place around the Civil War times, and it's about these cargo boats and stuff, and it was really good. It's funny, George R. R. Martin. One thing about his reading is you're definitely gonna know what everybody's eating, so all the time. So that's very interesting. But it was really good. I also finished the other day The Fold by Peter Clines.
Mm-hmm.
Was not impressed, to be honest with you. I was not a big fan of it. A lot of people liked that book and it was recommended, but I was not a big fan of it.
Did you read that or listen to the audiobook? Because I got the audiobook. I listened to the first 10 or 15 minutes of the audiobook, and I can't do it.
Yeah.
The narrator on that book, I don't want to say he's terrible, but on this book, he's terrible.
Yeah. Yeah, it's I definitely read it, but my problem with it was that the first 60% of the book was basically just about a guy like trying to get information out of these scientists on how they built this door. And then like at 90% of the book is when what I hoped would happen at 30% of the book happened. And so yeah, it was, I don't know if there's going to be a sequel planned or what, but it was and that was my first experience with him. I'm probably going to try reading the X Heroes stuff.
Yeah, I liked.
You guys talk about it.
Yeah, I've read the first 3. I just downloaded the 4th one last week and pre-ordered the 5th one. The 5th one just came out last week, so I've got 2 sitting on my thing that I want to read. That's a series that I'm enjoying.
But moving on from that, I'm currently listening to Revival by Stephen King. Which is a great. I mean, it's definitely a throwback to some of his older horror stuff. I'm also very early. I'm only like a few chapters into a book called The Hour Before Dark by Douglas Clegg, which is a horror novel. And the main thing I want to talk about, because this is kind of influenced by you guys, and goes back to what John said, is I made a kind of a deal with myself this year, like a commitment. I'm going to try to get into comics and graphic novels, and I've heard you guys talk about Saga and stuff on here, but I picked up a graphic novel called Preacher, and which is actually going to be a show on AMC soon.
Oh, awesome! I didn't know that.
Preacher's that's going back. Preacher's 90s. Is it that old?
I think so.
Yeah, I wasn't really sure how old it was. I don't know how AMC is going to do the show because there's some crazy violent stuff in it.
Yeah, there is.
But I'm hooked. I'm like 50% of the way through, and the cool thing is that the big volumes are like 350 pages, so it's kind of a bang for your buck type thing. Because with comics, you can blow through them pretty fast, and they're not cheap. So, I'm doing the Kindle version. Really, really enjoying that. So
that's awesome. I got to pick that up. If you're a fellow wanna be getting into kind of guy, could never do it before, and you like it, then that sounds like it might be just for me.
Yeah, it's basically, just real quick, I mean, it's just to tell you what it's about. It's basically about this guy who's like a preacher, and he has the word of God. Like I'm kind of early in, so I don't really know what's 100% going, but I think an angel like came down and basically like and put like possessed him and put the word of God in him. And he's got this vampire character that's with him, and it's all kinds of crazy. But I'm still pretty early in, so I don't really 100% know what's going on, but it's really good for sure.
Speaking of how AMC is going to handle things, I'm very curious to see when Negan shows up on The Walking Dead, which is going to happen at the end of this season. I don't think we'll see him until the last episode. Next year is going to be very interesting. I've read some stuff about they're worried about how AMC is going to handle his language, because part of who he is as a character is a foul-mouthed, like every second word is a curse. So.
And I tell you, I don't want to go off on too much of a tangent about it, but on the Horror Hours podcast this week, we're actually Jay and I, we've already recorded the episode, but we are previewing the second half of this season, and that show's kind of going downhill for me, and I'm hoping that Negan can kind of save it. And I like Jeffrey Dean Morgan, who's playing him. I mean, he was amazing in Watchmen. So it'll be interesting to see, but hopefully it spices it up a little bit, because that show's kind of almost jumped the shark for me in a way. So.
Well, they haven't had an antagonist since the Governor, right? It's just been kind of them against the elements, which can work, but yeah, they need a good bad guy.
It's pretty much been Rick. I mean, Rick's pretty much been the antagonist in a way, yeah. But yeah, that I'm not going to go off on a tangent about Walking Dead, because that could take up the whole show. So.
Okay. So the books that I read this week or have been reading, I read This Time Together: Laughter and Reflection by Carol Burnett, and this is it's an autobiography, but it's more a series of anecdotes than anything. It's not like a heavy, thick autobiography. It's like 50 or 60 short sort of anecdotes about how she met the people that were on the show, Tim Conway and these guys, and just some of the crazy things that happened over the years. If you did any of you guys, grow up watching the Carol Burnett show? No.
Watching it recently.
I was a little before my generation, but I do remember watching it growing up.
So I remember watching it and just loving. I mean, my favorite, little skits in that were when they would kind of lose control on the show and not be able to hold in the laughter. But
yeah.
So
Mama's Family came out of that too, right?
Yeah.
If you ever saw that, that was a great show. Yeah.
So if you were a fan of Carol Burnett and any of the things that she's done, it's just a quick read. It's just, like I said, a series of little anecdotes about a lot of the history there. And I continued reading Brilliance by Marcus Saki, and that's kind of the book that most recently has just kind of sucked me in. It's drawn me a little bit away from continuing my read of Destroyer by Brett Battles, which I'll talk about later this month as well. That's a series I want to continue with, and I am sure that next week everything will kind of go out the window, because Brandon Sanderson's the third book in his Reckoner series, Calamity, comes out, and when that hits my Kindle on Tuesday morning when I wake up, I'm sure that'll probably I'll get drawn into that. And with all of that going on, I got to keep that Stan Lee book in the back of my mind and get back to that before the end of the month, since we're going to talk about it in March.
I hear it's a fast read.
Yeah, I hope so.
It is. I started it because I didn't know how long it would take me, and I was like, okay, well, I'm kind of far into it. I'll just keep going.
Cool. So before we get to the topic, we'll just hit up the news real quick and see if anybody has anything they want to mention, because I have a couple things. Any quick news you guys want to blow through before we get to the topic?
I could say that next month I'm going to be doing a cover redesign on my Jenkins Cycle series, and within a month I also hope to have the audiobook out. But that's about it.
Cool. Anything from you, Michael?
Yeah, just started a brand new fantasy series that will probably launch in the summer, so I'm super excited about that. It'll be the main character will be a dragon, so I've been kind of teasing that a little bit, so that'll be fun, and just keeping on making videos for Author Level Up. So got some great videos that are coming out this week on marketing. So
okay. How about you, Zach? You have anything new or interesting going on?
Right now, really, I mean, the main thing I'm focusing on is I'm writing the 5th book in my Empty Bodies, my post-apocalyptic series. There's going to be 6 books in that series, and I guess the interesting thing for me is that every book in that series up to now has been 50,000 words, so they've been pretty short. They've been short, fast, action-packed reads, but this one, I passed 60,000 words today, and I have like a lot more to write. Like I think it's gonna be around 80,000.
Wow, that's awesome.
So, which is fine. You know, it's been a lot of fun to write. So I'm doing that, and then yeah, that's pretty much it. So hopefully that'll come out. I'm hoping in April, like early April, late March, early April. Probably more like April at this point. So.
Okay. And I've got, let's see, this week I will be on Spurt. For anyone who listens to that show, the Self-Publishing Roundtable, that's Thursday nights with Erica Conroy and Xavier Granville, and they've got a few guests coming on this week to talk about, I think the topic is writers who podcast. So that should be fun. And
they're okay.
I got this in the mail today. Anita and I have a new book coming out on Friday. Nice. Goblin and Pig, The Great Escape. This is the first book in this will be our first series. I won't show the inside because I'm an idiot, and when I put it through CreateSpace, I accidentally selected black and white instead of color.
Nice.
So the cover looks great. The interior, but man, I'll tell you, I've said this before. CreateSpace is amazing.
Yeah.
The ground ship, like you just pick their ground shipping. It comes from, I was looking on the map, comes from South Carolina, I think. I ordered the proof on Monday morning, and it was here when I got home from work today, so like 36 hours. And so I know that when the files get reapproved tonight, I'll order a new proof tomorrow. I should have them Thursday, and then it all goes live on Kobo, Amazon, Apple. It'll be everywhere on Friday.
Did you pay for the rush delivery?
Nope. I didn't even.
It's a rip-off.
Yeah, it's $9.95 for just the ground shipping. So,
yeah. And they're so fast to begin with. Why do you need the rush?
Considering it's crossing international borders to get here as well, like it's pretty amazing.
Yeah, what's funny for me is that I don't even proof mine anymore. Like I just do the digital proof because I've kind of got the system down on it, and so like I'll just price the book really low and then order mine on Prime, and then up the price so I can just get it really cheap. But I just don't tell anyone that the paperback's up. So that's kind of what I've been doing. So I cheat.
So with that, we will move on to our topic, and so two things I'll mention before we get too deep into it. One, John always feels bad mentioning his book, so I think we need to let him know that it's okay to talk about the Jenkins cycle if we're talking about horror. It's okay to promote. And so the genesis for this show and one of the reasons we asked Zach to come on and help us out, talking about horror and sort of how dark is too dark, started with an email from my mother, actually, who listens to the show and sometimes watches live. And so I think she listened to the audiobook of Karen Slaughter's book called Pretty Girls, which I hadn't heard of until now. And one thing to note is that I noticed the book is in thrillers and suspense. It's not listed as a horror book. And there's no warnings about content. And it is also something else I noticed, one of those strange books, you normally see the reviews go, there's more 5 stars than 4s, more 4s than 3s. This kind of like goes down in this sort of a straight line almost, right? This is one of those books that has more 1 stars than 2 stars. There's a little bit of a blip there. And the reason, I believe, is for the same reasons that my mom had a problem with it. So I'll go through a little bit of what sort of her comments on it. She said it's an absolutely horrifying in its graphic depiction of snuff porn with rape and torture of several young girls, none of which is indicated when you read the summary of the book. And that's true. So she went on to talk a little bit about a little bit more about the book, but so her questions basically for us was like, do you think that kind of detailed violence is necessary in a story? She noted that she won't be reading anything else by this author, and how do we as writers cope with thinking about all of these terrible things all the time, and basically how can we sleep at night? So we thought that this would be an interesting topic, and let's see where it takes us. So on this particular book, I'll note the 1-star reviews. All of the ones that I read have the exact same problem with this. They're like, this is disgusting, terrible. How, I went into this expecting, a fun mystery book, and I get, slapped in the face with these just absolutely disgusting, horrible things. So what do you guys think?
Well, So is this a self-published book or is it a traditionally published book?
I believe it's traditionally published. I've got it up here on Amazon. The publisher is William Morrow.
Okay.
Yeah,
What's
traditional? HarperCollins.
Yep.
Wow. So clearly HarperCollins really messed up. Because they're not. What's the name of the book?
Pretty
Sorry,
Girls.
the name of the book? Pretty Girls.
I just want to look it up real quick because it'll help. Okay. So,
Yeah, the author is Karen Slaughter.
Yeah, when I look at this on Amazon, the only thing that even remotely tells me that this book would be what you said is that the author's last name is Slaughter.
Yeah, I noticed that too.
The cover doesn't nothing. So they're clearly not aiming at the correct audience because there is a audience for those types of books. Whether people think it's right or wrong, there is an audience for those type of books. And clearly, nothing about this book, says that. So that's just really strange to me.
And I will say too, though, that it does. So it's got 1,690 reviews and a just bang on 4 out of 5 star rating. So people are enjoying this book, but it's clearly not working for some of the audience who, you look at that cover, it's a gold chain, like a locket, a heart locket, sinking under the water. You would not. It looks like a literary or mystery story. It does not look like
or even suspense. It doesn't look like what it is.
So, some of the dark books that I've read I don't have a problem with a lot of the dark stuff. I was trying to think of some of the darker books that I've read. One of them that jumped out at me that I can remember is I, Zombie by Hugh Howey. That's a zombie story from the perspective of the zombies because they're the way his zombies work are the people who are zombies. Their human brains are still working, so they're trapped inside their own heads, watching themselves do these terrible things. There's some pretty terrible things that happen in this book. Mute your mic, your headphones for 10 or 15 seconds because I'm going to spoil one part if you don't want to hear it. But basically, there's a zombie woman walking around in an office building, and she's pregnant, and she has her baby while she's a zombie, and it kind of falls out of her, and it's trailing around behind her, still attached to her by the umbilical cord for a while. There's some really dark stuff in that book. But I loved it. The Killer Inside Me by Jim Thompson. I think that's another. It doesn't get too dark, but it's a book about a serial killer from the perspective of the serial killer. He's sort of not masquerading as he is a sheriff in this small town, but he's also a killer. And so we get to follow around and see things from his perspective. What are some of the darker books that you guys have read?
I actually don't read a whole lot of dark books, but I do have one. I'll say that in just a sec. Most of my experiences with torture porn, as I have heard it called, would be like Human Centipede.
Yep.
There's absolutely no redeeming quality, in my opinion, to this. It's a movie about taking a bunch of people, stripping them of their humanity, torturing them through the whole movie in the best possible ways you could please a fascist, and then the credits roll and the audience queues up for Human Centipede 2 and then 3. Okay, you were talking about my books. I'll make it very quick. My book 2 in the Jenkins cycle was sort of a repudiation of this. The main character possesses people. He possesses the body of a writer who writes this kind of stuff. And he sits through one of the guy's movies, and he's totally disgusted, and the audience is clapping and laughing as people are dehumanized and destroyed. And I got a lot of flack from this from the Goodreads folks. It's been kind of missing from Amazon, but basically I had people give up on the book because they thought I was writing torture porn when it was quite the opposite. I absolutely hate this stuff. Okay, the book that I have read kind of comes closest. The Island in a Sea of Time, by somebody Sterling, I think. It was an incredible book. It's about Nantucket going back in the past, and like suddenly it's this whole world, and Nantucket's there with like helicopters and guns and technology and science.
Is that
And it could
L.M.
have been-
Sterling?
Yeah, I think that's it. And it could
Because
have been
that's
like
his thing. He usually writes about society or an entire town being blasted back to the past. I think that's him.
Well, it was really good in that respect to an extent. I thought it could have been like Brave New World. Let's like make penicillin. Let's spread democracy. Let's not destroy our natural resources. Let's I mean, come on, think about it. Imagine if we could go back then, we could preserve all these archaeological sites and ask indigenous peoples and write down their languages and record these things, all this positive stuff, and it would have been fun. You could have made it fun, and instead it was rape, kill, defecate, destroy, torture. The most vile types of tortures everybody was voiding before they died, and it just got so incredibly bleak and dark that I found myself reading it going, am I supposed to think that this is why I'm reading the story? And then I stopped reading.
How about you, Zach?
So I probably come from a different perspective than you guys, because I've written, like, I don't want to use torture porn, but I've written a slasher novel. So just to start first, as far as stuff that I've read, probably the most disturbing book that I've actually finished, because I'll get in a minute to some stuff that I started but put down. But the most disturbing book I've ever read was The Girl Next Door by Jack Ketchum. It is, like, if you type in on Google top 10 scariest horror books, it's always in the top 3. So I was like, I have to read it. It's essentially it's kind of a coming of age story and it's from the first person, about this girl that moves into this neighborhood, and all these like young kids, they're like, I don't know, I think like 10 or 12 or something. They get to know this girl and stuff, and long story short, they end up locking this girl in a basement, and one of the kids' moms like basically encourages them to do all this crazy shit to her, to do all this crazy stuff to her, and it's brutal. But here's one thing I will say about it. It's done in what could be a tasteful way, I guess you could say. There's obviously some very graphic descriptions and stuff, because it'd be really hard not to do that. But he also like kind of knows where to draw the line. There's a couple parts in the book. There's one part in specifically that was really brutal, but he said it's in first person, and the guy said, some things are better left unsaid, and kind of leaves it to your imagination instead of saying, going into grave detail what's happening, because it was a brutal scene. So that's definitely the most dark book that I've read. But as far as writing this stuff, so I have a book called The Witness, and it's a slasher book. I got in the mood where I wanted to read something, because I'm like, when I was in my 20s, my late teens, like I loved all that old campy slasher stuff. Friday the 13th, Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It's just fun, And so I wanted to write something like that. And I wanted to read something like that. So I went on Amazon, I started looking for books, and I just, these books I found were just, I was like, I'm literally like 6 pages in, and there's already been like 4 rapes with any type of object you can imagine. I'm just like, I don't want to read this crap, like I'm just, I have no interest in reading it. Maybe when I was like 20, and I loved watching the Saw movies and stuff, like maybe that would be all right. But so I wanted to write a book that was still pretty gory, but I had lines that I was drawing, but I'll admit, one thing that your mom had asked was, how do you sleep at night, writing this kind of stuff, and that book was actually, I got, my word counts were definitely smaller in that book, because I could only do so much of it in one day before I was just like, okay, I've had enough, like, because I was going into some really dark places. Like I basically took these 5 characters, and the whole thing is stereotypical to like a slasher novel. I have these 5 college kids, they go on a road trip. There's the jock, there's like his girlfriend who's like tutors him in college, there's the nerd, there's the really good looking guy, and then there's the kind of shy girl. total stereotypical, and then I wanted to do just the worst things possible to these characters. And that's my second most popular book, like next to Empty Bodies. Like that one definitely sells. Second most, and it's I mean, it's brutal. I mean, John, like this book I would never send to John because I know John is just not in that stuff, you know.
I'm into money though. I mean, maybe I could change my morals, you know. I don't mind.
There is an audience for that stuff, like, you know, and that's my thing. Like, I don't want to, like, you mentioned Human Centipede. Like, I actually watched that movie. It was an hour and a half of my life I'll never get back.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if any of you guys have ever heard of a Serbian film. Any of you guys heard of that?
No.
I don't think so.
So a Serbian film is probably the most like renowned torture porn book, like with hardcore horror. People, I've never seen it. I heard on a podcast these people talking about it, and I almost puked. Like there's this. I work with a guy who has seen it, and I told him, I was like, man, I can't believe this this scene in this book. Like I can't even tell you guys about it on the air. It was the most disgusting thing I've ever heard in my life. And this dude I work with who'd seen it, he was like, dude, that's like the 10th worst thing in that movie. And I was just like,
wow.
Are you freaking kidding me? But like I was kind of saying, you know, there is an audience for that stuff, you know. So I don't necessarily like, you know, stomp on anyone's right to make a Serbian film or to make Human Centipede or whatever, but, you know, I don't necessarily want to watch it. But there definitely is a market for it out there.
Yeah, I like to think that I don't have a line a lot of the time when it comes to stuff, you know, humor or and I'm not a huge. I like horror. I like thrillers. I'm not a slasher fan. Like I never really liked the slasher type movies. But the Human Centipede. I mean, I never watched that movie from end to end. But when I was a
End
short
to
period.
End to end.
No pun intended.
Dear Lord, man.
Nice,
There was a period where we had Netflix, and I was like, everybody was talking about it at the time, and I was like, I'm just gonna scan through it on Netflix, and I saw enough of it that, I mean, it crossed the line for me where I was like, somebody should, you know, where I was thinking, you know, somebody should hunt down the people that made this movie and make sure they can't ever make another one. And of course now they've made like 4 or 5 of them, right?
Three.
And while there is an audience for it, I mean, there's an audience for anything, but I have to imagine that you are limiting your audience quite a bit the deeper you go, right?
Yeah.
The further you go down that tunnel or that funnel, you're squeezing out more and more and more people until you've got, like, you know, 10 or 12 guys who want to read your book.
Well,
Yeah.
you know, go ahead, Michael. You have something?
No, I was just gonna say, you know, that's like marketing at its extreme, right? Like we were talking about the cover of Karen Slaughter's book and how, you know, the cover doesn't do its job with the marketing. Like I think that's almost taking it to just too far. Yeah, that's all I was gonna say.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I just have no desire to watch a movie like that.
Yeah, no, and you know, I'm 31 now. Like I'm not, and I have a daughter. I have a 19-month-old daughter. So, like, I'm not as much into the slasher stuff as I used to be. You know, I mean, the horror, I like more, you know, smart horror now. But yeah, I mean, but it's funny, like there's this perception though that like people who write that stuff like have to be deranged or something, you know. And some of the people that write that stuff, or, you know, I come from a music background, you know, like I played in heavy metal bands in my 20s. Like I was in, you know, like a death metal band, and, you know, I had to put up with the whole, oh, you must be demented, you must be crazy, you are Satan worshiper. Like I was in a Christian death metal band, so that was really funny. And so yeah, like some people I know who write the most like brutal heavy metal records, or write, you know, like these really insane horror stuff, are like the nicest, sweetest people ever. And for some reason are just attracted to that type of entertainment, you know. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you're actually thinking about doing these things, you know. It's just part, for whatever reason, just the entertainment you're attracted to. And I can't, you know, I don't think, you know, that any of those people could tell you necessarily why they like that stuff either, if that makes any sense.
Well, and you have to be able to, you know, because I've thought about this stuff before, and I think you do have to be able to put yourself in the mindset. You have to be able to consider these things, right? Maybe not to whatever level you're going to take it, but you have to be able to imagine a person who would do X. Or else how can you possibly write about it? You have to be able to put yourself in their mindset, hopefully for a limited period of time, like you were saying, Zach. And yeah, you have to be able to kind of get inside their head and imagine a person who, what was their childhood like that they grew up to do these terrible things? How did they become the person they are? Because you don't want to write. It's a cop out to write somebody who's evil just because they're evil, right? These people were raised, or something happened to make them like this, and I think one of the things I was thinking about is I think that's for an author, but I think that's why you sometimes hear that method actors go a little crazy sometimes when they're on set, putting themselves into the mindset of a character that they're maybe playing in a movie that's like that, and they can't kind of pull themselves back out of it. So I think even as authors, you want to be careful. Go for a walk and pull yourself back out of that mindset. But you have to, whether you're a writer or an actor. You have to be able to at least consider these things and put yourself into their head, right?
Because they happen.
Yeah.
Like, these things happen, you know? I mean, like, that's the thing is, like, I think that, if you're writing that kind of stuff, like, like you said, you're kind of in that headspace, Now, my line, like I said, I won't write rape. Like, that's just, I'm not going to mess with that. You know what I'm saying? But rape happens, like some people can read that stuff. I can't, but to pretend like, it shouldn't be said is, I think, ignorant, because, like I said, it happens, torture happens, like all that stuff. I mean, it really happens. So I don't think you can necessarily ignore that and just pretend like it doesn't. It doesn't mean you have to like it or read it, but
there's a difference. Yeah. I mean, if you're making a story that has rape, that's way different than a story who has rape. The purpose of the rape is to titillate an audience. A story can have torture, like Game of Thrones, but nobody sits down to watch Game of Thrones because, like, we know it's a torture show. They sit down and they dread the torture that might happen in this episode. It's not there to titillate people who just really love torture. But I think, sorry, Mike, you were going to say something?
Yeah, go ahead.
Whoever.
No, go ahead, Mike.
Go ahead, Zach.
Well, no, I was just going to say, I mean, but but maybe a lot of people who watch that type of stuff, like, they don't necessarily like get off on that stuff happening or excited about it, but maybe it's like, it's what am I trying to say? Like, they have that same feeling you're saying, but they want more of that. Does that make sense? Like, I don't really know what I'm trying to say. Like, because I get what you're saying, but I don't know. I'm kind of losing my train of thought.
There's a huge difference too, I think, between showing it and off screen, as it were, and how it can be part of the story, and you don't have to walk the reader through every bit of it, right? Like you said in that one story you were talking about, Zach, where the author was kind of like, some things are better left unsaid, right? Yeah. Like even the first person narrator of the story kind of said, we'll come back later when this is over,
Yeah, and I mean, and one thing I learned writing that stuff is, I mean, if you want to write a slasher novel like I did, it's hard without having that description. It's a lot easier to show that in a movie, and show how. But like, if you want to really capture that audience in a book, it's difficult. I mean, it's really, really hard to do without being really descriptive and coming up with all this really crazy stuff you want to do to people in the book, So
yeah, I would say, ultimately for me, I draw the line at rape. That's just this place I'm just not going to go. Same thing with gratuitous violence. For me, it all comes back to the story, right? Like, the reason we read books is for character and for story. And for me, if the violence or the torture gets to the point where it's not serving the story, that that's just not the kind of thing I want to read.
Yeah, it's all
Just me personally, you know.
Yeah, you have to decide what you're going to show, right? Like, so Dexter might be a good example of that too, both the books and the TV show, where, I mean, he did absolutely terrible things to people, killing people and basically cutting their bodies up and dumping them in the ocean, right? But pretty much the most you ever saw was you might see him turn on the saw and start walking towards the guy he had strapped down to the table. You might see him come down with the knife, and that's where it would cut. It was the violence and the murder, and that was kind of what the show was about, but you never saw any of it. They handled it in such a way that it was about him and his relationship with his sister and his coworkers and everything else, and but that was horror. That was
for me personally, the line of what I'm willing to tolerate, and maybe this makes me a wimp, but Silence of the Lambs, right? It's got just enough gruesomeness and brutality, but it's okay. I mean, there's some seriously effed up stuff in that movie, right? But I can tolerate that. Anything beyond that just kind of kills it for me.
And we all have different tolerances too. Like, I can't handle, I can watch a movie where people are getting their limbs hacked off and it's, Game of Thrones, whatever. I don't watch it, but I mean, it's not gross, but I cannot watch, whether it's documentary or completely fake in a movie. One thing I can't watch is anybody having like surgery done on them, being cut off. It's just
I can't do that either.
I just, there's something about the human body being cut open and operated on, even if it's not horror. If it's just, I just can't stomach that stuff. Like, so that's one of my lines.
And they're watching the Discovery Channel for you.
So there's no medical thrillers. I don't read medical thrillers. I don't watch, TV shows that deal with any of that stuff. I can't handle it.
Yeah, I can't do that either. So my wife can sit there and eat a bowl of spaghetti and watch someone get their stomach operated on.
Oh.
But I can't do that.
My wife and I always watch My 600-Pound Life, and there's a lot of surgery in that.
Yeah.
So, we could eat spaghetti while watching it. It's cool. What's up, Mike?
No, I was gonna say I had a couple of books that were on my list as well. You guys read or seen Deliverance?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Okay, well then you know the scene I'm talking about with the rape, the sodomy.
Ned Beatty, yeah.
Well, I've never seen the movie, but I've read the book tons of times. I love that book. But the reason I like it is because of the character. I like, what Ed, the hero's going through. But yeah, that for me was pretty gruesome. That was a pretty gruesome scene, with the sodomy. Mm-hmm. And then, you probably haven't read this, it's a literary novel, but Disgrace by J.M. Coetzee.
Like, we wouldn't read this novel?
You just offended John.
No, I'm not saying, no, I'm just saying it's kind of one of those obscure things that, I expect you guys to read. If you have, kudos, let's talk about it. Have you read it, John? Okay. See.
We don't have them literary novels down here in the South.
Yeah. Well, this one's it's disgusting on a lot of different levels, but not so much because it's gruesome, but because it's about a college professor who basically falls in love and starts having an illicit relationship with one of his students, and it gets to the point where he is, she clearly doesn't want it, but he's making her do it, and the whole community comes against him, and it's just pretty sick. I mean, it kind of reminds me of Lolita a little bit by Nabokov, just in terms of the child crap, that people write about. That's another line. That's another place I won't go either. That's why I just can't read Lolita. Despite I know people say it's probably it's not as harmless as it seems, but that just is going a little too far for me. But that's another one that was I just remember reading it and thinking, man, this is really disgusting. Like there's not even really a sex scene in the book. It's just like the mindset of this character and what he's doing.
Well, I think I haven't seen it yet, but I had heard rumblings that was it Jessica Jones was the new the show, and that the character that David Tennant plays I can't remember his character, the purple something or other. I can't remember. It's a show that I really want to watch, but I had heard that some people maybe had a hard time watching his character because he's all about manipulating the main character's mind and making her do things that she doesn't want to. So yeah, it's the manipulation and mind control kind of stuff, which is a little bit maybe what you're talking about too. Like,
Yeah.
it's not
Like
necessarily
not, yeah.
physical rape, but it's like a form of mental manipulation.
Yeah, it's the mental abuse portion of it, and I think that's an element too that a lot of writers can get into that I think can maybe cross some boundaries as well. Where it may not be as graphic, but just some of the things that they're talking about. Like I think of Flannery O'Connor. If you guys have read any of her short stories, Good Man is Hard to Find. That's more violent than it is gruesome, but just the way like she sets her scenes and she sets up her characters. There's some pretty demented stuff in some of her stories, and people have. I know people I talk to or people who leave reviews on her books they're so offended by her stuff, but there's really nothing offensive in it other than maybe some of the language, but it's just the mental setting and all that she lays out as an author that just offends people.
Right. So we're over our time, which is great because it's been a fun conversation, but we can start sort of wrapping things up here. Are there any sort of other thoughts that you guys wanted to get out there before we wrap things up?
Yeah, me too, I guess. Yeah. Go ahead, John.
I'll make it quick. I think that there's a tendency in horror movies to let evil win. Like you watch a character or a bunch of characters go through an entire ordeal and everybody's like suffering and dying and you come to love these characters, and at the end, like they're all like drones and their eyes are glowing because evil won. They're all hacked up and dead because evil won. And to me, that's sort of like a hopeless sort of pointlessness to it. Like, why are you watching this if evil always wins? I need evil not to win.
I have to say though, you talking about that put me in mind of two movies, Cabin in the Woods, which I absolutely loved, and World's End.
Cabin in the Woods was not a serious horror movie.
No, but it hits all the tropes, and it is kind of there's some slashery stuff going on there.
They were great.
Yeah, World's End, and when it comes to World's End, though, I'm actually talking about the the after credits little bit with Simon Pegg, which I just absolutely loved.
That was an awesome movie, and I love the credits. I know exactly what you're saying. Go out and watch this movie so you can laugh too. But these were not serious movies. It wasn't like Human Centipede, to use another.
True.
Anyway,
True enough.
I'm done.
The good guy doesn't always win, John.
Well, it's not interesting to me if they're not winning.
But that's the point, though. Not to you, but to some people it is. Like, I don't want to see the character get away every single time. That's part of my big gripe I was talking about with Walking Dead, is that that show, they won't kill any of the main characters. They keep getting out of these impossible situations.
But Zach, have you read the comics?
I have not. I've read the first 2 volumes, but I haven't gone. I'm waiting on them from the library from Overdrive right now.
So I mean, they have killed some primary characters in the past, like Herschel. But you're right, that core group seems to be safe. But I'm going to predict that I'm hoping in the very last episode of this season they're going to get rid of a very, very core character.
I've already seen. I know what you're talking about. I have seen that, and that is the one thing that could save that show for me.
Yeah,
that's the one thing, because I'm I'm used to I don't always want to see characters make it. Like I think that it's just predictable. Like my favorite television show of all time is Sons of Anarchy. And I tell people when they're going to watch that show, I want you to write down 5 characters you think are going to live through the whole thing, and then good luck. But it keeps you on your toes, and if you've written enough good characters, then it's okay to kill off people because the show can still survive. Game of Thrones does the same thing.
You're right, and that's because then you take a series like Lee Child's the Jack Reacher books. one of the reasons they can get boring after 20 books is because you know nothing's going to happen to the guy.
Exactly.
Right. So it's even if it's a fun story that the ride kind of, it'd be like going on the same roller coaster 20 times. Like the first couple times it's thrilling. By the 20th, you're just kind of, waiting for it to be over.
I do want to throw one other thing out there just to kind of bring a little humor in the conversation. So my book, The Witness, has my favorite 1-star review I've ever gotten.
Oh, cool.
And so in my product description, like I have a big warning in bold that says it's for mature audiences only. It features graphic descriptions of violence and death, cannibalism and torture. If you're not used to reading extreme horror slasher films, this is not the book for you. Don't buy it. Don't read it. It says in the description, like, this is for fans of Texas Chainsaw Massacre or House of a Thousand Corpses. It says slasher horror as the subtitle. Well, I got a 1-star review that says, don't buy this book unless you think Friday the 13th is exciting. Gross and stupid. What was the point of this book? I should have read the title better. Slasher should have been a dead giveaway. Maybe when I was 20, I would have enjoyed it. Don't waste your time. Luckily, it has 1 of 5 people found it helpful. So,
Oh my God.
But yeah, so I guess that's also just proof that you can write whatever you want in the product description, but doesn't necessarily mean people are going to read it. But yeah. So. But,
So with that, does anyone else have any sort of final thoughts?
No.
I think we're good.
I would just real quick. I would just say that just throw a couple more good books out that kind of are a good example of this and not necessarily crossing the line too much. I mentioned Girl Next Door.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely recommend that book because it doesn't cross the line too much, and it's just a great overall story about the human condition. And then Ken by Keelan Patrick Burke is a great like slasher thriller that doesn't really show like a whole lot of crazy stuff, and it's just a great story. And you love the characters. Ken, K-I-N by Keelan Patrick Burke. Yep. Okay. That's all I got. Okay. I'll shut up now.
Well, thanks for coming, Zach. It was great having you on the show. Yeah. And where's sort of the best place for people to find you online? Would that be your website?
Yeah, just www.zachbohannon.com. That'll take you to the Horror Writers podcast and all my books and all that good stuff. So. And
Bohannon is Bohannon.
That's correct.
For our listeners.
And VACH.
Right. Yeah. Hopefully they know that. So thanks again for coming. We are not too sure yet, I think, what our topic's going to be next week, so everyone can tune in and find out. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching, and we will talk to you next week. Have a great week, guys.
Take care, guys.
See you later.